So hello, and thank you for joining us today for our conversation on immigration in Latin America. I am Beatriz Magaloni. I'm a professor in the Department of Political Science. I'm also a faculty affiliate at the King Center on Global Development, and I direct the Poverty, Violence, and Governance Lab that is within the Stanford Freeman Spalding Institute. I work on Latin America. Much of my work has to do with development, violence, and recently I've been focusing on immigration. So I have a project that deals with legal pathways to immigration, a randomized control evaluation supported by the King Center here. And I have the honor to moderate today the discussion with our distinguished guests. Before we begin our conversation, I want to tell you a little bit about our host. This is the King Center on Global Development, and as a faculty member here at Stanford, I can tell you that this is the hub if you want to do research on development. The King Center supports the mission of bringing research-based solutions to global poverty and inequality, and they do this in a variety of ways. One of them is supporting faculty in conducting their research with a lot of financial support, but also administrative support to conduct research that can bring answers to the problem of how to solve global poverty and inequality. A second way in which they do their mission is by teaching and training the next generation of global thinkers on development. And I can see, for my participation in this community that is from undergraduate students all the way to postdoctoral students, a lot of students really benefit from this community. And the third way in which the King Center contributes to global development is by convening conversations like today on critical challenges and problems about development. So before we begin our conversation, I just wanted to mention these are all the projects and different themes that the King Center is supporting and is involved. So today we're going to focus on immigration. I want to begin by giving some figures to contextualize our conversation today before I let the speakers share their knowledge about the field. The first thing I want to convey to you is that immigration in the hemisphere is not really only a US problem. It's not only a US challenge, and it's not only a US opportunity. Today, if you think about this, more than 7 million people that are refugees and migrants from Venezuela, and you look at the countries where these people are going, you can see that Colombia, it's a big receiver of this immigrant community, Peru as well. But you can also see that immigration is a constant factor that is going on from South America to South America today. So that's a very important thing that we have to keep in mind when we have this conversation. And the second thing I want to talk about is the current spike in encounters, or apparently what we observe as a sharp increase in immigration attempts, undocumented ones, towards the US. And you can see a big spike in the last 3 years. But this apparent big spike has to do also with repeated tries. So a third of these tries are people that want to come and try again. So that doesn't necessarily reflect the huge spike that this apparently reflects. And the last thing I want to mention is that we tend to believe, if we are based on the United States, that most people who come to the United States, either with documents or without authorization, come from Mexico and the Northern Triangle in Central America. And that is really not necessarily the case. We see that 50% of the apprehensions are really from these countries, but increasingly there is the other 50% of people are coming from other parts of the world. Of course, Venezuela, the Caribbean, but even outside of the Americans. So it's very important to understand all these pathways of migration, that they are complex and that they are really at a global scale. And the last thing I want to mention is that The US is not the only country who is facing the problem of apprehensions. So just if you look at Mexico, there were 400,000 apprehensions in 2023. That is around 20 to 40% of the size of the apprehensions that happen in the US-Mexico border. So what this really means is that this is a broad regional issue and that it requires regional cooperation to really deal with the problems, but also the opportunities that immigration represents for global development. And so having said that, I want to introduce our speakers. So we have the honor to have with us Felipe Muñoz, who leads the migration unit at the Inter-American Development Bank. Previously, Mr. Muñoz was the presidential advisor for the border between Colombia and Venezuela to the president of Colombia, where he coordinated the government response to the migratory flows from Venezuela at the national and local level, as well as the related efforts of donors, international actors, and organizations of civil society. He has also served as a senior advisor to the board of executive directors of the Inter-American Development Bank and held various positions in public administration in Colombia at local and national levels. Welcome, Felipe. Then I want to introduce Margaret Spears. Margaret is the Deputy Assistant Administration in the U.S. Agency for International Development Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean. As a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, Margaret has held various leadership positions throughout USAID, including her most recent appointment in Jordan, but also in Colombia and Bolivia. She has quite a large experience working in Latin America, as well as outside of Latin America. Before joining USAID in 2002, Margaret worked at the US Department of State on trade policy and programs. Welcome. And then I want to introduce Michael Clemens, who is one of the world's leading scholars on immigration. We are so honored to have you here, Michael. He's a professor of economics at George Mason University and a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Michael built the research program on international migration at the Center for Global Development in Washington, D.C., where he's now a distinguished non-resident fellow. He's also affiliated with the IZA Institute of Labor Economics in Bonn, Germany, and the Center for Research and Analysis of Migration in the Department of Economics at University College London. And I just want to mention that if you want to go ahead and check Michael's CV, which I did last night, looking at all the publications that he has. Of course, I have read his work, but what is really striking is all the links to your papers of all the coverage that he has received in places like the New York Times, The Economist, and so on, just to tell you the impact of his research across the globe. So welcome. Please come to the podium, and so we will. So just to let you know how the dynamics of the conversation are going to go. The speakers are going to speak for 7 minutes each, which is, I know, difficult. It is a short conversation. Then I'm going to ask a couple of questions to each of them, one question to each of them, and then one question to the three of them. So we will have a conversation, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience.
No, first of all, thank you, Beatriz, very much, and thank you to the King Center on Global Development. This is a pleasure to be here in Stanford. I've been reading something about Stanford history yesterday during the flight, and I have found that more than around 60 Nobel Prizes had been around these rooms. Then this is a very privileged place to be. And also to be in the same stage with Michael Clemens, of course, who I admire and from whose research I learn a lot, and all the people that work on migration has to read their work. And and also with Margaret, because USA has been one of the main partners at the Inter-American Development Bank to develop and to transform the challenge of migration into an opportunity. The suggestion for me to talk about it is about my experience in Colombia's government when I was a presidential advisor from 2018 to 2020. And I'm trying just to thinking what are the main ideas that maybe I want to share with you. What are the lessons learned from this experience? Just to give you an idea of the numbers, more than the numbers that Beatriz present, Colombia has 6 years ago, 150,000 migrants at all, from all the nationalities. It's a country where they have its history of emigration, but not at all any previous experience in immigration. And in 5 years, we have received 2.8 million Venezuelans, which is now 5% of the population. Then this is a very short period of time where you receive a lot of people. Then, of course, you can imagine that there is not a structured institutional capacity, even no debate in the academics about immigration. Then, when I arrived as a presidential advisor, of course, my role was to coordinate from the Office of the President the process. And what I'm going to share with you, of course, is not only my work, it's a work of a team leading by president. And not for one president, for two presidents, because when I arrived, it was only 7 months to finish the President Santos' term, and President Duque arrived and decided that myself and also the director of the migration entity and also the person who leads the migration issues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs stay in the post. Even there is a political difference between the two presidents, they decided that this need to maintain because this is more like an state challenge, not only a governmental issue. And I want just to share with you 4 ideas that I think it was important when we were there. The first one is that you have an information asymmetry. When we arrive, of course, the migration entity has some information, and the first temporal permits that they gave to some of the people is the people that enter legally or regularly for the ports of entry. But when you have a border of more than 2,000 kilometers between Venezuela and Colombia, you have a history of interchange of binational families. The people move very freely for the border. Then the people arrive not for the legal port, arrive for everywhere. Then the information that you have to manage the situation is very limited. Then the President Santos said, we need to make a registration process. And I coordinate with other entities in the government, not migration, because migration has the role to expel the people that come irregularly. Then we say no migration, and we need to create confidence in the migrants because they come from a regime where they don't have any trust in their government. Then we need to create confidence. Then we call the international community, UNHCR, IOM, and a special office of the Ombudsman in Colombia, and create in more than 140 municipalities in the city hall offices, like a place where the people can go and register. But we don't tell the people what is happening after the registration, because there are some debates internally at the government that if we told the people that, we are going to create, as we call in the academic sector of migration, the calling effect. Is that if you announce that you are going to provide some registration or some permit, the people come. My first takeaway is that it doesn't exist. The people anyway is going to move. I pass a lot of, so many days in the border asking the people if they are hearing about what are the decisions that we're taking in Colombia, saying, no, we're not hearing nothing. We are moving anyway. It's not what we are doing. They have their own forces in the migration. And then we can get the registration in 3 months for 440,000 people. And with a very long survey with all the socio-demographic characteristics. And we go to the public and say, okay, this is the process, this is the people, there are so many children, there are these women that are located in these municipalities, and it creates a sense of the government is in control of the situation, which is quite important in these kind of things. Then I think the information is quite important, and also to reach out the migrants, because the migrants not get the formal channels of communication. They use another form. The second one is, of course, about the political incentives. When I arrived, it's just 7 months to finish the government. Then the discussion in the government is, we are going to take decisions for a long time. And at that time, in 2018, Today we are more intelligent than at that time. All we think in Latin America that it's time for 2 months or 2 years and all is going to be resolved in Venezuela. Not happen. But then we began to put temporal protection permits for 2 years. After that, the president took take the decision for 10 years because we realized that, of course, it's impossible that the situation is going to be solved in a good. But there was so many decisions about the political incentives. The other one is that all only look to the director of the Migration Office and Minister of Foreign Affairs and say, this is your topic. And the first cabinet that I present, the president saying, no, it's not only your topic. It's the topic of you as well, Minister of Education. It's the topic of you as well, Minister of Health, because it's not only just a problem of the border, a situation, a challenge. It's because those people is going to stay here, and we need to guarantee that all the other social sectors are involved. Then this is the second thing that this discussion about political incentives are interesting. I think that there is coordination, and it's absolutely key that we can maintain from the president's office a horizontal coordination between the government entities. The second one is the vertical coordination, because it's not only a situation of the federal or national government, it's a situation more for the mayor, for the governor, for the local authorities. Then you need to communicate. I go with a group of people from the national government to the cities and sit in front of the mayors and their teams and say, okay, we are here together. This is a sharing challenge, and we are going to work together. But also, you need to coordinate in a transversal way with the international cooperation. When I arrived, for example, there are more than 70 between UN agencies, international NGOs, and local NGOs trying to help. But if you're not organized, it's the best way to go to hell. Because you put the same vaccine 2 times, you go where all the cameras are, but not where you need it. Then you need as a government to take a leading role and say to the corporation, we thank your support, but we are leading the process. Who are you going to support? And lastly, but not least important, 2 minutes, least important is communication. I learned from Rui Marques, who was the director of the refugee process in Portugal in 2015 when there was some movement in Europe. And he told me it's really important that you communicate as a government that you are in charge of the process. The word like this, alleviation, the flow, this kind of thing creates a sentiment in the people that is really hard to manage. Then you need to coordinate, and you need to try to make the message very clear, trying to use another people to communicate, because sometimes it's not the government the best one to be the messenger for some of the messages. You have to appeal to humanity as well, but also you have to be aware that the migrants always also stay informed, and in that way you need to look for the channels. We recently launched a laboratory on public opinion and perception at the IDB, and I strongly recommend that you can see. I try just to summarize. It's a work of so many years for so many people, but trying to get some lesson learned. You need information, you need coordination, you need to be aware that there are political incentives that you have to discuss, but what is most important, you have to communicate to the public, to the mayors, to the migrants, what is happening, what are the next steps, and in that way, it's not always to solve magic, but I think create a better environment to take political important decisions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Felipe. That's great. So we'll come back to this when we have the conversation, but I think hearing more about the surprises and what you think was the most successful of those would be great. So we'll come back to that later. So Margaret, please.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you. It's great to be here with all of you. And as mentioned, I'm from the U.S. Agency for International Development, so that's the U.S. government's development arm. So I'll be focusing, while migration is very complex and has a lot of different aspects, and there are other parts of the U.S. government looking at humanitarian aspects, I'm focusing today on the development work. So as mentioned, because development and migration doesn't always get the attention it deserves. So this is the USAID's regional approach includes supporting the integration of migrants into third countries, such as what was described in Colombia, facilitating legal temporary labor pathways, as well as promoting development to address the root causes of irregular migration. So first I'll talk about integration. So USAID supports migrants who have already left their home country and they're on the move in the region, and helping them obtain regular status and connect with the jobs and local services like education and health, like Felipe mentioned. So for example, when the influx of Venezuelan migrants came to Colombia, we worked hand in hand with the government of Colombia to help them be able to really implement the plans that and the policies that Felipe mentioned. So, this is an incredibly generous policy, hosting large numbers of migrants, and so standing with them is really important and playing a fundamental role in helping them establish the policies and implement and be able to deliver the services. So that was 10-year temporary protected status in Colombia for 2.5 million Venezuelans, and then Ecuador, Brazil, and other countries have followed suit. And the data shows that these policies really work. If people have the opportunity to stay closer to home, build a new life in a new community, they will take it, not risking a dangerous crossing, settling down rather than feeling like they have to stay on the move. And there are benefits to the host community as well. The IMF estimates that countries hosting large migrant populations like Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, and Peru will see a 4.5-point increase in their GDP by 2030. Other benefits are showing up even sooner. Like in Colombia's capital city of Bogota, the past 3 years, migrants have started 9,000 new companies in the city and have created 188,000 new jobs for Colombians and Venezuelans alike. But these policies can have high upfront cost, politically and financially, as Felipe has explained. And so that's where USAID support's really important in helping the countries to implement these. And so just a few examples of how this works. For example, in Colombia, USAID supported one-stop shops where migrants can access a range of government services from documentation, healthcare and education, psychosocial support, and job placement. And so we've helped launch these centers in 9 municipalities in Colombia as well as Peru. And in Colombia alone, they provided services to more than 83,000 users at that. So, but then we also support the longer socioeconomic integration of the migrants through workforce development, validation of academic degrees, schooling, et cetera. That's really important. Integrating migrants can be a win-win if done the right way, and if we include the host communities. So we're focused on trying to expand the resources to support these efforts. But then also, the cause of that migration oftentimes coincided with political imperatives for moving, but the needs of people also include economic imperatives. And with that, we're looking at, we don't just recognize the benefits of migrants to the host communities in Latin America, but they can also fill critical temporary labor gaps in the United States and elsewhere. So that's why we're working to expand access to lawful pathways so people can work on temporary jobs safely and legally in the United States and other countries. So at USAID, we've been working with governments of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras to help nearly triple the number of H-2 visas issued to workers from those countries, from 9,800 in 2021 to over 28,000 in 2023. And the support to national ministries has helped to build their capacity to help recruit workers, process petitions for temporary work abroad opportunities, train workers on their rights, and apply for visas. So we're hoping to continue to expand these opportunities in 2024, not just to the United States, but between countries in the region as well. And then finally, development is important for addressing complex root causes that can drive irregular migration. And so there's been a root causes strategy that was launched in 2021, and it's brought critical resources and attention to the region so people from Northern Central America can thrive and prosper at home and also have more possibilities for their lives. So these continue to make a difference. For example, in just the last year in Guatemala, 37,000 youth have taken advantage of vocational and job training programs and to better respond to the needs of local labor market. And more than 18,000 women have participated to increase access to economic opportunities. So these are just a couple of examples of that kind of thing. And in terms of migrant encounters at the US southern border, the numbers went down from those 3 countries between 2021 and 2023. We can't draw a direct line between those programs and migration levels because it's very complex, but these are encouraging signs that for people that they have choices and that the efforts can help people access opportunities at home and they don't have to uproot their families. So while USAID plays an important role within the US government to address migration through our development work, we also work with others who have an important role in regional migration, from enforcement to refugee admissions, ethical labor standards, et cetera. So the US government is just one actor collaborating to address migration. So in 2022, at the Summit of the Americas, the Biden-Harris administration brought countries together from across the hemisphere to endorse the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, and 22 countries have joined the effort. And the framework recognizes that migration is more than just a border issue. It's a regional phenomenon that requires us to work collaboratively with our partners in Latin America and Caribbean. Since then, 22 endorsing countries have worked together to develop shared policy commitments around issues such as the regularization and integration, lawful pathways, humane migration management, and more. So together with international organizations such as International Organization for Migration, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Inter-American Development Bank, others, we're deepening engagement and collaboration on these issues. But the collaboration shouldn't end there. Many of you in this room are expert researchers or passionate students looking to join this cause. I'm proud to share that we're collaborating with Stanford's own Dr. Adam Lichtenheld, who heads up the Immigration and Policy Lab, to improve how we measure and track progress across these migration priorities. And my team facilitates a migration learning agenda to ensure we're taking the best known approaches to integrate migrants and support labor pathways and address root causes. So I look forward to identifying ways to work together to leverage innovative thinking from academics and other thought leaders on this cause. So I look forward to collaboration and a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. That's great. Thank you for sharing that range of activities that you are doing, and also the concern about evaluating the impacts that you raised. So we'll come back to some of these. Thank you so much. Michael, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I want to bring the discussion more toward the U.S. policy perspective and the border in particular. Beatriz, you put that shocking graph of encounters at the border before. We're really talking about these issues at an historically unprecedented time. Fiscal year 2023, migrants from large majority Latin America were encountered at the border 2.5 million times. That's about 7,000 every day. In this past December, it averaged 10,000 a day. This is not our parents' border or our grandparents' border. I've sat where you are a lot. I've seen a lot of panels. The number of ideas I remember from the median panelist I've seen is 0. So my highest aspiration is to leave you with one idea, and that idea is that crisis is not at all a migrant crisis. It is an American crisis. It is a crisis that results directly from for the Americans in this room, collective refusal to invest in and build lawful channels for migration. And I want to explain more about what I mean by that. But looking at that situation of chaos in which the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, documents the deaths of 686 migrants at that border over the last several years, to say nothing of those not documented, a really highly problematic situation, to put it as lightly as possible. How can we regulate it better? My claim, we have 3 basic options. The first, which is very popular in the United States, very popular in my neighborhood in Virginia, enforce the law. Enforce the law. Decide that the laws governing immigration to the United States right now, built 2 generations ago in 1965, last updated 34 years ago, are apt to our present circumstance. They foresaw the catastrophe in Venezuela. They forecast accurately by skill and sector, the labor needs of the United States of America in 2024. Extend the bollard pedestrian fence from 350 miles to 2,000 miles at any cost. If 30 feet isn't enough, build it to 40 feet. Close the ports of entry. Detain the few remaining asylum seekers who can get in indefinitely. And deport the 97% who don't get asylum. Ignore the research of Michael Clemens that this will have a negative fiscal effect on Americans, citizens. Ignore the research of Giovanni Peri that will reduce real GDP per capita of the United States. Ignore the research of Chloe East et al. In the very highly regarded Journal of Labor Economics published very recently that behind the border mass deportation efforts reduce native employment through a variety of mechanisms because those policymakers of generations past are asking us to bear these costs. Option one. Option two, and this is a very highly popular option around the world and across America and in a bipartisan sense, is to caricature it a bit, develop Latin America. Develop Latin America so that people have less need to depart from poor and unstable places. It's even popular around the region. The just departed president of Guatemala, Alejandro Giammetti, used to talk about el muro de prosperidad that we're going to build. That is, he equated the economic prosperity of Guatemala as established in partnership with aid donors as serving the equivalent function of a wall at the border in that it keeps people at home. A skeptic might look at that agenda and ask, well, what exactly is the policy lever that the United States as an aid donor has to increase the economic prosperity of countries under the control of the Ortega regime or the Maduro regime? What policy lever does the United States have to bring dignified job opportunities to Haiti, whose real income per capita today is not just lower than it was in 1985, it's lower than it was in 1945 today. Economic development efforts are not going well in Haiti. It would be right to be skeptical of the developed Latin America view for those reasons, but it's actually much worse than that for the developed Latin America view, and it's that successful efforts to develop Latin America, mostly by Latin Americans, of course, will increase immigration from Latin America. This is the consensus not just of the last 50 years of economics research, but also across the social sciences, political science, sociology, anthropology, and geographers, a literature I reviewed in a book chapter. When the Gallup World Poll asks people about their aspirations and imminent plans for migration, the rate of imminent planning for departure goes up with income in Guatemala. It goes up with income in Honduras. It goes up with income in El Salvador. The people leaving are not the poorest people. People who get resources, who get human capital, who get international connections are the ones who leave. And those things come with development. When Mexico gave cash transfers, when Honduras, through PRAF, gave cash transfers, the recipients of those cash transfers, when randomly selected, compared to people randomly selected not to get cash transfers, became more likely to emigrate from Mexico and Honduras, both in the short term and long term, in the research of Karin Makur and others. Across the world, countries that started out poor and got richer have more and more people leaving them, not less and less, until they get quite wealthy. And this is something that very reasonable, smart, experienced people have looked me in the eye and said, that can't possibly be true. What are you talking about? I've talked to migrants. They say they're leaving because of poverty. Do you think they're making it up? Of course they're not making it up. It's just that the people that you're talking to are not the poorest people who weren't able to leave. As a rule, across the board. In my work on unaccompanied child migration from Northern Central America, the region of Guatemala with the highest poverty rate is not the region of Guatemala with most unaccompanied children leaving them, the Central Highlands. It's the one with the fewest unaccompanied children leaving it. The same in Honduras, gracias a Dios, in the far east, is the Department of Honduras with the highest poverty rate and the lowest unaccompanied children migration rate. Migration is an investment that people make in a better future, and once you start to think of it like that, you think, well, when people invest in stock or invest in university education, they do that more when they get more money, not less, because they don't need the money anymore. And when we start to think of migration as an investment in a better future and in the value of the human capital of people, it starts to make more sense that that successful economic development in Guatemala, in Honduras, in Ecuador, in Haiti, will result in additional migration. So this is not a problem we can develop our way out of. And you might notice, if you had walked into this room and said, 2/3 of this panel are working with aid agencies, they're gonna talk about how we can keep people from showing up at the border. That wasn't most of what they talked about. And that's because they understand this phenomenon extremely deeply. Option 3, which I'll close with, Beatriz, because I know I'm talking too much, is lawful channels for migration. In these brief moments, we don't have time to talk much about what the form of lawful channels could take. The panelists have talked about two or three specific forms, and we could talk about a lot more. Lawful channels are incredibly paltry. On the airplane, I totaled up the numbers for fiscal year 2022, which are the most recent available. These are for Northern Central America plus the CHNV countries, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. The number of encounters per asylum grant in the United States in fiscal 22 is well over 200. 200 people being encountered at the border per one who gets asylum. The number of visas available to those people that they could have gotten. Setting aside family visas, almost none of those people have immediate family members who can sponsor them for a green card, so I'm setting those aside. All the other visas that don't require a college degree, which the vast majority of people at the border don't have. 50 to 60 encounters per visa. That is, less than 2% of the people showing up at the border could hypothetically have gotten a visa. It's fantastic, the expansion of visa opportunities that the very best people at USAID have been pushing for in the United States and helping countries of the region build together. It remains extremely tightly constrained. Lawful channels are not just paltry, they increase job opportunities for the United States. I've done research on the effects of the H-2B visa, the principal work visa to the United States for work that doesn't require a college degree outside of the farm sector, how that affects firms that in a lottery run by the government get visas or don't get visas. The ones that don't get them don't just go hire Americans, they contract revenue by 17%. And they don't hire any additional Americans. In fact, in rural areas of the United States, they hire fewer US citizens when they lose that lottery. Lawful channels for migration reduce crime, which has been shown in a very large literature over decades. Lawful channels for migration don't have to be permanent. And I've seen some of you nod when I say some of these things about lawful channels, but here's one that is less known. Lawful channels for migration have to be built. Migration, despite a lot of propaganda out there, is not like the ocean. It's not like water. It doesn't come in flows and surges and waves and all of this stuff. And if you open the door just a little bit, the whole ocean's gonna come in. Lawful channels for migration have to be built with hammer and nails and design and innovation. And built the achievement of expanding those lawful channels for Northern Central America that Margaret talked about has taken an enormous amount of work by people at USAID, by people in the partner countries, by people in NGOs, by people in different agencies of the US government, all coordinating together to figure out how to make that happen in a way that is administratively feasible and politically supportable. It takes investment. It's a hard thing to do. It's not just about opening the door and things will just happen automatically. I'll conclude with that's the acorn that I want to leave you with, that lawful channels for migration are sine qua non of addressing this crisis of American policy, and they are an opportunity for mutual benefit. This crisis doesn't have to happen. It doesn't need to continue. It can be turned into something that is really positive for all of us. And I'd love to talk about some of the specifics of these generalities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we are running a little bit short of time.
Due to me.
No, due to all of us. So I'm going to try to be brief with the questions I want to address to each of you. So to you, Felipe, I would like you to reflect a little bit of what South-South migration and what appears to be really a much generous approach that Colombia followed, how much this can teach us for what is happening in the South-North migration, and specifically, why do you think it's more generous when it was Colombia's accepting Venezuelans or even Brazilians, Venezuelans, versus what happens not only in the US, but in Europe, towards people migrating from Africa or South America?
Yes, I attend the Global Refugee Forum in December in Geneva, which is the global meeting every 2 years with all the worry about the refugees and the discussion. And in every panel that I attend is the recognition of the process in Latin America. And I don't want to be not fair, because the Colombian case is a very good example, but in general terms, there is a process of regularization in all along the countries. It's happening a regularization process in Ecuador. Of course, they are not perfect, they can be better, but there is a process in República Dominicana with the Venezuelan migrants. Belize has 15% of the population of migrants, mainly from north of Central America, and they are running a very generous process of regularization. There is a process of regularization in Peru. I mean, there is a set of regularization process, which is not only in Colombia, and I think they are showing to the rest of the world that you can have a different approach when try. But with the recognition in a very pragmatic way that the people are not going to return. All the surveys that we have is that when you ask a Venezuelan person that have migrated from Venezuela to one of the neighbor countries, is that if they think to return to Venezuela in the next 5 years, 75% say no, by no means. Then this is not more like humanitarian situation, like a crisis. This is a development challenge. These people are going to stay in the recipient countries for a long term. And I think the pragmatic approach that so many of the countries that is not more how we are going to attend these humanitarians, how we integrate, how we put into the social network these persons, these people, because they are going to stay, how accommodate the kids in the schools, how we can strengthen our health system to attend the people. And I think this is a different feature. Also, accompany that, parallel to that, with a renewed process of change the migratory laws in some of the countries in the region. Then I think, yes, Latin America and beyond the southern border, which is where what can I talk about it, is with difference, of course, with some caveats, but in general terms, there had been a very generous process, and the world is looking what is happening in Latin America, and I think there are a lot to learn about it.
Thank you, Phil. So I think I would love to ask you something about the shocks for causing migration, because these are really hard to deal with. Like, for example, violence, an eruption of violence, which pushes people out. Maybe in waves, right, or short waves. And climate change would be one of the big concerns everybody is now, having. So what have you been thinking about this, or, USAID, have been thinking about ways to mitigate the challenges of climate change and how that relates to migration? Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's as you said, climate change can be encouraging people to migrate, not just internationally, but also within a country. If they're in one area that is, the seas rising or landslides or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a number of things that USAID is trying to do. Climate change overall, but then also helping cities to become more resilient to climate change. and plan for this kind of migration. It's more disruptive to everyone when it's unexpected and where they're coming is unable to absorb quickly the influx of people, because that creates more of a humanitarian problem than it might need to. So preparation is key. Trying to do things that can help mitigate or adapt to the effects of climate change is important. So we have some programs in the hemisphere to work with specific cities even on this, and it's something that is also being integrated into all of our programming in each country. Yes. So, and it's something that relates to migration, but it's not specific to
migration. Yes.
Yes.
So that leads me to asking you a question about, I'm very happy you brought this, so lawful paths to migration. And that ties, when we were doing interviews in Mexico, now currently that we're working with H-2A workers that are coming to Oregon and Washington, that's our project. We'll talk more about that later. But a lot of them cite climate change, drought, as one of the main reasons they want to come work here. So I want you to elaborate to the audience, because maybe not everybody really knows about what are the really many of lawful paths to migration that are really available. And I think this is really something that ought to be more in the public debate. I think your work has been advocating for this for a long time, also finding results. So just to, before you open up for discussion, if you could give a short summary of the many of alternatives that we have with that.
Yes, thank you. There's a central feature of lawful channels to the United States, and it is that from the beginning, they have been almost entirely demand-driven for Americans. 75% of immigration right now is family reunification, meaning somebody in the United States sponsors somebody to come. Much of the rest is employment-based. An employer decides, I want you, you can come. Almost none of it is what an economist would call supply-based, people outside the United States saying, I would like to come in because my government is collapsing, because farming is no longer viable due to climate change, because there was a hurricane, because there was an earthquake, or any other reason why you might want to come. There is the asylum system, which is now vastly, vastly overburdened. There is the diversity visa lottery, which was designed to be a global, to put Bhutan on the same footing as Honduras, regardless of the regionality of migration or any other force related to what might make a lot more Hondurans want to come to the United States versus Bhutanese. So it's February 2021, Joe Biden comes to office, and one of the first things he does is issue an executive order saying explicitly, for the first time that I'm aware of, a US president, to address what's going on at the border, enhance lawful pathways for migration for Northern Central America. Problem, what is the policy lever that Joe Biden has to do that? Can he decide how many H-2A visas go to Honduras instead of Mexico, for example? Can he decide how many H-2B visas go to Guatemala? No. It's entirely driven by employers. Unless a US employer says, I want a Honduran, or a specific named person who lives in Honduras, 0 H-2 visas can go to Honduras. It doesn't matter what Joe Biden wants. So there's a clash of what's going on, which is people, families taking their fates into their own hands and making massive investments to try to make themselves better off, making Americans generally better off along the way. A collision between that and the total lack of policy tools that allow flexibility of policy in the absence of demand by families and employers. And I want to highlight that particular feature of the lawful channels that we have, which to me is the central underlying cause of the vast overburdening of the asylum system. Why? Because the asylum system is the only one that can respond to migrants' decisions in the absence of sponsorship by Americans. So given that we have allowed no other lawful channel for that to happen, what we have left is the asylum system and the fence. And there's a third option, and these incredible innovators sitting next to me are doing what Felipe described doing in Colombia is like Steve Jobs level innovation, an incredibly difficult challenge that
absolutely.
Colombia did unbelievable things with, and they're having to make this up on the spot. Nobody's ever held Margaret's position before in the US government. These are brand new things, and it's really exciting, and it's necessary to be done.
Thank you for sharing this with us. I think it's the right moment to give the audience time to share their questions.
I've spent a lot of time at the border and in Mexico as a member of the Jesuit Refugee Service, which is an international organization. I would say that we're doing a disservice. I agree that the asylum has been overburdened because it's the only way. But if my understanding of international law from the United Nations, meeting with Guterres himself when he was a commissioner, is that you're allowed asylum to where you're safe. That would mean that 99% of the people that go to Mexico are safe. They don't have state-sponsored violence. They have all kinds of horrible things, the cartels and everything that are killing people, but that's not the same thing. And it's only worse now from an asylum standpoint. There's a statistic that I'm sure you are all familiar with, which is if somebody goes in front of an asylum hearing with an attorney, they're 80% likely to get asylum. If they go without one, they're less than 10%, and there's some, they don't add right, but so
thank you.
Could you address the asylum issue from that perspective?
Thank you so much.
Most Americans would say, let them stay in Mexico.
Thanks for your comment. I'm going to try to ask, we have very little time left, so with very specific questions. So I think we will be able to take maybe 3, and then you could answer them. Yes, please, very specific question, just short. Yes.
For Senor Munoz, I want to ask, you just mentioned that you coordinated between the central government and the local government for the border issue, and I kind of know that in many Latin American countries, the central government did not have enough control for the local government. So what difficulties did you meet, and how did you solve them?
Great, thank you. Very good. So another question? Here, thank you.
I have a slightly different question about the asylum system for Professor Clemens, and my question is much more on the kind of shift in the imagination of the asylum system in the U.S. And the ways in which I think we've seen a systematic erosion and barriers put up towards accessing asylum. So given that and kind of the trendingly mainstream narrative that asylum seekers are actually economic migrants kind of taking advantage of the system, I'd just love to hear your response to that, and would love to hear too, with that narrative becoming so prevalent, how do we kind of educate or put forth a more accurate narrative about what the asylum system is, the increasing barriers to the asylum system, and then why people, unfortunately, why there's such high denial rates?
Great, thank you so much. So I think I give you time to take the questions. Yes.
Let me first answer. I think in Colombia, I think it's not a matter of control. I think it's a matter of coordination, because it's the national government that go to the mayor office and say, okay, this is a shared responsibility. Why don't we work together and try to solve the situation together? And also we invite the international community and the donors, and we gather at the same table and say, okay, and we move these coordination committees or create these coordination committees in each of the main cities where the migrants arrives. But of course, in other countries it's more difficult, but even in Brazil, for example, which is a federal state, from the presidency, they coordinate what they call Operación Acogida, which is a very important process of locate the migrants, for example, in Sao Paulo, in coordination with the people from Sao Paulo, and to put them looking for some jobs and some. I think this, the message is, I think is coordinated, is difficultly challenging, but you need to have in mind that this is not a situation that you can solve only from the national federal government. You need to involve the local authorities, and I think this is the best way to deal with it.
Wonderful.
Could I talk about asylum? So why do I focus on labor pathways? As I mentioned, if we're thinking of Northern Central America and CHB countries, fiscal year 2022, 230 apprehensions, encounters, but mostly what DHS calls apprehensions, per grant of asylum. So adjust the standards that are being applied by asylum officers and immigration judges to triple that number. We're still at 3 per 230. What is going to meet the protection needs of the rest? And whenever I talk about it to just excellent, wonderful, accomplished advocates of refugees and asylum seekers, when I talk about lawful channels, they say, what are you talking about? You're saying these people are lying, they don't really need asylum. Here is what I'm saying. There are legal categories in the United States of migrants, and I sit in rooms with so many lawyers who see migration a certain way and don't get at all the way that I see migration. In the United States, you are either a family immigrant or an employment-based immigrant, or a humanitarian immigrant, and you can't be both of those things at the same time. You literally can't have a family-based green card and an employment-based green card. You can only be one. And the lived reality of most migrants is not that. If you are displaced from your farm by climate change to an urban area where there is gang violence and can't go to school and are sent for a better future to live with your uncle in Chicago, are you a family migrant, an economic migrant, a refugee from violence, or a climate migrant? The answer is yes. You're all of those things at the same time. And the fact that the US law only has one category for you is not relevant. It is possible to meet people's overall needs for protection, what Betts and Fleming refer to as survival migrants, by all kinds of channels. And what we need to be doing is expanding regular pathways and lawful pathways in ways that are beneficial to migrants and beneficial to Americans, certainly within the asylum system, but I can't believe when you look at the numbers that any feasible expansion of the asylum system, including with partner countries like Mexico, could address the protection needs. That it is not to say that they're lying or poo-poo the need for asylum or anything like that. It's more of a yes and.
Absolutely.
Does that make any sense? Thank you.
Margaret, you want to end our discussion with some reflection on asylum or anything that you want to share?
Yeah. And so, well, just one other thing, looking at the lawful pathways for labor, it also gives the families more options. Maybe the whole family doesn't need to go if there's somebody in the family that can work and earn money and help to support them. So, and just going to what had been said on the asylum and the lawful pathways, that we are facing kind of legal constraints on how many are still open. And so what we've been trying to do is improve the utilization of what's there. But that of course, there's certain categories that aren't capped and others that are. So we're trying to push on the ones that have more potential, which is good. So, yeah, but I see them all as complementary. The integration, the lawful pathways, and then also improving the situation at home wherever you are.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on asylum because I also serve as expert witness in a lot of cases because I specialize in violence, and so they asked me for my expert opinion, and I have really see the difficulty of the asylum laws to really accommodate gang violence as part of what it is. It can really be a political persecution because often the authorities are really working in association with criminals, but the law is not ready and has not evolved to accommodate this reality. So it's very frustrating. It all depends, in my experience, on the judge that receives the case. And you have some amicable judges and then some judges that, with the worst circumstances that you will get denied. All of them with really very good attorneys behind them. So definitely I think it's not evolved, the system, the legal system here, to accommodate this. So I want to thank our panelists for a fantastic discussion, and also the audience. And you are going to be receiving an email. We have the recording of the conversation, so you will receive that. Thank you so much, and thank you for the King Center for hosting the conversation. Thank you.